So before we get into talking about Sonic Colors for DS, I want to talk a bit about this whole kind of, I don't know, business marketing model thing for making games, because I'm really not a fan of it. Not just Sonic has done this, lots of games back in the day would do this. I remember seeing a bunch of like 3D platformers coming out for like PS2, GameCube, and whatever, but then they would also have GBA versions, but it was a completely different video game. And that's the same thing that you get with something like Sonic Colors for DS. It's Sonic Colors on the DS, but it's actually not. It's an entirely different game. And it's just kind of weird to market a game as like an alternate version of the same game when it's most definitely not. But also, creatively, I find that these types of games are such a waste of effort. Because you look at Sonic Colors DS here, and clearly it's built right off of the engine and framework that they use for the Sonic Rush games, which is a great gameplay framework for Sonic. I love the Sonic Rush games, and it makes perfect sense to reuse that for a new DS Sonic game. My problem, though, is that this being the companion game to Sonic Colors, it doesn't really have an identity of its own. You know, it's got mostly the same story, it's got the same zones, the same music. There's nothing in particular from this game that you're gonna remember over just things from Sonic Colors in general. You know, I think of Sonic Rush, and I think of the awesome Hideki Naganuma soundtrack. I think of the unique zones in it. Like, I really love Water Palace, and I like a lot of the zones from Rush Adventure as well. And I love how that whole game is themed around, like, pirate adventure stuff. I love Blaze, I love the kinds of stories that were being told in the Sonic Rush games, and with Sonic Colors DS, you get similar gameplay to those games, kind of, but then everything else is just a discount version of Sonic Colors, so this game doesn't really stand out in any particular way. It doesn't have its own identity. The same is true, I think, for all these companion versions, Unleashed for the Wii and Generations for 3DS. Even if they're still good games, I would much prefer, instead of a companion Sonic Colors, why not make a Sonic Rush 3, you know? We had a whole development cycle to make another DS Sonic game using the same engine and everything. They could have made, instead, an entirely brand new Sonic game with original zones and story and music and everything. And wouldn't that just be better? Instead of having this kind of side game that most people don't even pay attention to. Like, I always see videos about games like this that are like, the forgotten Sonic Rush game. And it's like, the only reason that this game is forgotten is because it is Sonic Colors for the DS. If it was a proper third Sonic Rush, it wouldn't have been forgotten. People would have fondly remembered the game just like they do the other Sonic Rush games. And I just hate this whole kind of situation, that you get tons of games like this that many people worked on for years, and then it just kind of gets lost to the annals of history, where people don't even really remember it existed, or don't even know it existed. And even with re-releases, these kinds of games still end up getting lost, because, like, you know, Sonic Colors Ultimate came out, but it didn't include this Sonic Colors, it only included the other Sonic Colors. Is this one ever going to get re-released ever? Probably not, because I imagine Sega deems this as whatever, it's not important, and that sucks, man. So, because of all those reasons, I'm really not a fan of these kinds of companion games, but I guess probably Sega determined this would be the most profitable thing to do, instead of making a third Sonic Rush or whatever. And that really sucks, but at the very least, we don't have to forget about these games, and Sonic Colors DS is absolutely a solid game. And as I've already said, this game very clearly is built off of the Rush games, so it has a very solid foundation to build off of. However, one thing I do want to point out, a lot of people do kind of consider this to be Sonic Rush 3, for obvious reasons, but I do not agree with that. I would not call this Sonic Rush 3. And it's not just because it's not an original game with Blaze and all of that stuff. It actually mainly comes down to the gameplay. Yes, this game does use the Rush system, but a lot of the mechanics are changed to no longer be like Sonic Rush, and they're actually more like the other Boost games, like Sonic Unleashed and Sonic Colors. So, for example, the trick system and the infinite meter mechanic from the Rush games, that is not here. Also, there's air boosting in this game, which was not in either of the Rush games. They've also added stomping and sliding under narrow gaps and wall jumping, all things that were not in the Rush games, but were introduced in Sonic Unleashed. The boost meter here also works like it does in Sonic Colors. You fill it by collecting Wisp capsules or killing enemies. Though meter management here is nowhere near as important as it is in the other Sonic Colors, here I felt it was more akin to something like Unleashed, where I had plenty of meter most of the time and I didn't have to worry about it too much. It was something that I did have to consider, but nowhere near as much as a Wii game, which I felt was one of the greatest strengths of that game, so it's kind of a shame to see it not quite as strong here. And in my opinion, those changes are all significant enough to make this a very different experience than you get from the Sonic Rush games. It feels more like I'm playing Sonic Unleashed or Sonic Colors, but it's a game that's just entirely made up of 2D sections. And that still absolutely works, and it's still a fun game, but it's not Sonic Rush. I would not call this Sonic Rush 3. And the fact that it doesn't have Blaze and an original story and everything like that, that just kind of amplifies the whole thing. Not like not being Sonic Rush 3 is a criticism for this game or anything, I just disagree with people that claim that this game is. I feel that it's a bit too different to be counted. But the actual game itself, it is a pretty good 2D Sonic game, though I have to say, it's not my favorite. I know a lot of people do enjoy this game, in fact, a lot of people like it more than the Wii game. Personally, I am not there. This is actually one of my least favorite 2D Sonic games. It's still a good game, it's still fun, but I feel the design here is not quite as strong as other 2D Sonic games. And I also feel there are some features and mechanics in this game that are a little bit annoying. For one, I don't know if this is actually true, it's been a while since I played the Rush games, but when I was playing this, it felt like the game was faster than the Rush games. That Sonic literally moved faster, and it felt like I had to completely memorize or predict everything about the level design, because it was moving so fast, and there was certainly quite a bit of that in the Rush games, but I still felt like I could react to things half-decently there, and I did not feel like that was possible in this game. Time attacking was honestly kind of annoying here, because it felt like it was pure memorization and trial and error. Additionally, this being Sonic Colors, of course we have the Wisps here, and in some ways I would say the Wisps here are actually better than they are in the console Sonic Colors, because they've removed that little delay before you activate a Wisp. Now you hit the button, and immediately you transform and you can start using the ability. And that's really great, much better for the pacing. It shows that that was absolutely the right way to do things, and the Wii game just didn't do that. And a lot of the Wisps from the Wii game are here. We have the drill, we have the rocket, we have the laser. But there are a couple of Wisps missing, but in their place, we have some new Wisps, original just to the DS version of Sonic Colors, which is kind of cool. But unfortunately, I am not a fan of these two new Wisps in this version of the game. I think they are quite annoying to use. First, we have the Red Wisp, which gives you the burst power, which is kind of the equivalent of this game's green Hover Wisp, where instead you get the ability to basically do infinite jumps in the air, and it kind of gives you some floaty physics as well. And you can hold the button to charge up a jump, and the more you charge, the bigger your jump is going to be, but also if you charge it all the way, then you do this big explosion that kills all the enemies on the screen. And that's all fine. My issue with this thing is that the way it controls and the physics behind it are quite clunky in my opinion, and very hard to get a handle on and control it well. And again, because of the speed in this game and how close in the screen is, you really have no idea where you're going. They try to put a lot of like arrows and stuff pointing you in the right direction, but a lot of times it feels like a crapshoot. I don't know where the higher routes are or the fast routes or this or that, so I'm just kind of going up because up is usually a good thing to do in a Sonic game. And they have these, like, balloon bomb things that are all around, and if you hit them, then they start launching you all over the place, and it's, like, impossible to have any kind of control with this sort of thing. So it can be quite frustrating to use the burst power effectively and quickly when you're trying to run these levels, because it's just, there's so many variables here that will get you wildly different results, and it's very difficult to get your hands on. Not too dissimilar from why I don't like pinball mechanics in 2D Sonic games a lot of the time. So, not really a fan of that. And then this game has a different power for the Purple Wisp. It gives you the Void power, which is an equivalent to the Frenzy power up here. But the Void can kind of fly, and you, like, point it in the direction you want it to go, and then it will automatically go in that direction and eat everything that it comes into contact with. And I do have to say, this is probably the most interesting and complex Wisps out of any of them in the Sonic Colors games for what it can do, because it also gets larger and faster as it swallows up more things. And that's used in the level design in some interesting ways, where you have to eat enough things to get to a large enough size that you'll eat up a Wisp capsule to give you a different power-up so you can take a shortcut later. So it's not just about getting through these sequences quickly, but you also need to make sure you're eating things along the way. And there are also these fans that can instantly redirect your speed in a different direction, and they are pretty interesting. But again, the controls on this thing are pretty clunky, and once more, I don't necessarily always know exactly where I'm supposed to be going or what I'm supposed to be doing with it. There were many a time using the Void Wisp in this game where I didn't really know what I was supposed to do, and then I died, and that's not my favorite. And then beyond those things, I feel that just the general level design here is pretty decent, but just not quite as strong as other 2D Sonic games. But I do still think overall this is a pretty alright 2D Sonic game. One of my least favorites, I would probably say, but still a good game for sure. Beyond the core gameplay stuff, here's an interesting one. Missions in this game. This game gives us a glimpse of what the Wii version of Sonic Colors was probably supposed to be a bit more like. I talked about this in that video. This game has 2 acts per zone, and then it has a couple of side missions you can do, which is almost certainly what the original structure of the Wii game was supposed to be before they padded it out. Unfortunately, these missions are not really anything worth your time, if you ask me. They're very similar to the kinds of missions we saw in Sonic Rush Adventure, meaning they're pretty whatever. You got things like kill all the enemies, get to the end of the level under the time limit, which can sometimes be interesting because you have like very little time and you have to keep collecting clocks to give yourself more time to make it to the end, which is kind of cool, but it's not really that different from just beating the level. There's also some things where they drop you in kind of a more open area and they say, collect all the Wisps, or whatever, and yeah, they're whatever, not really anything spectacular. These kinds of, like, mission things that they've tried to do in so many Sonic games to pad them out, they just have never really worked super well before, and this is not the time when they finally got it right. It's just another implementation of mediocre missions into a Sonic game that nobody really wants to do. Let's see, there's also boss fights, and they are pretty similar to the bosses from Sonic Rush Adventure in how they work, but I feel they are nowhere near as good as Rush Adventure in terms of design. That game was a very rare instance of a Sonic game that actually had pretty decent boss fights, and this kind of regresses that. They at least don't take too long or are too annoying, but the bosses here are just very slight. There's not much to them, and a lot of them go down really quickly. So they're kind of just here, and then they're gone, and you move on. Red Rings, that was a really big part of the Wii version of Sonic Colors that I really enjoyed, and I did not find it nearly as fun here to collect the Red Rings. And I feel a big part of that is because these levels are so much longer than the levels from the Wii Sonic Colors, because those were larger levels that were split up into smaller sections, so you had less ground to search through to find more collectibles. But also, because it's a 3D game with unique environments for pretty much everything, it's much easier to parse where you are and where you've been. This game being built the way it does, it reuses a lot of assets for, you know, the ground and the platforms and stuff, and the background is just a static picture for the most part. So it's really hard to get your bearings and learn the level design really explicitly, where you can know exactly where you've been and where you haven't been and where to search next. That is a lot more troublesome here, and it resulted in a number of levels where I had like one red ring left, and I just had no idea where to look for it. It felt like I had checked every single part of the level, and I just didn't know what to do. And eventually it started to get so annoying that I just gave up on collecting the red rings, because it just was not fun. Fortunately, in this game, you don't need to collect the red rings to get access to Super Sonic or anything. This game just has straight-up special stages, normal, traditional special stages. I believe you get access to the special stages kind of in the Sonic 1 method. When you complete a level with 50 precursor orbs, then at the end it has a menu that asks you if you want to go into the special stage or not, which I really appreciate, by the way. I like the option of not doing the special stages if I just want to focus on the main gameplay. But as for the special stages themselves, they're not great, in my opinion. Probably some of the weakest special stages they've ever done. They're not terrible, but they're just not very fun. As you can see, we're doing the half-pipe kind of thing again, using the same system as Sonic Rush, where you control Sonic with the cursor, and that works pretty well. But the goal here is a bit different than normal. Instead of collecting precursor orbs, we have to collect these spheres, and these special stages are done in 3 laps, and each lap you have to collect a different color of sphere to get your counter up to where it needs to be. And the potentially interesting thing about this design is that collecting spheres of the wrong color does nothing for you. They just disappear, and then they won't be there on future laps where you need spheres of that color. So it's about collecting the spheres that you're supposed to get, but not collecting the ones that you're not supposed to get, which is a cool idea. But it's really not that interesting, because avoiding the spheres is not really difficult at all, and the special stages in general are quite easy, and because you're collecting less things, you have less things to actively be trying to go for, it's much less engaging than the Rush special stages, which I felt were much more action-packed with you trying to collect as many precursor orbs as you can, and that required a lot of, like, flicking Sonic all over the place. This is a lot more slow-paced and laid-back and kind of boring. And because you're doing 3 laps around these tracks, they go on for way too long, so I am definitely not a fan. I mean, I'm normally not a fan of special stages anyway, but these in particular are quite weak ones. But once you complete the special stages, then you unlock Super Sonic. However, unlike the Wii version of Sonic Colors, you don't unlock Super Sonic in normal levels here, which is kind of unfortunate. No, actually, this game, unlike the Wii version of Sonic Colors, has a Super Sonic Final Boss minigame, which is quite interesting. It makes me wonder if maybe that was originally supposed to be in the Wii game and they cut it or something like that? Or maybe the team working on this game just wanted to go the extra mile and do something different and cool to make their game stand out. Regardless of the reasoning for this being here, it's quite interesting, but, yeah, it's a typical Supersonic minigame, meaning it's not really that good. That's just how I feel about these things. I was fine with the Wii game not having these, because these are usually pretty bad, and this is, yeah, it's one of those. And I think that's pretty much it. I don't think I have anything else to say about Sonic Colors for DS. It's an alright 2D Sonic game. Not my favorite one, and I certainly don't like it as much as the Wii Sonic Colors, but it's not bad. I'd say it's worth a playthrough. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not really a fan of how it's just Sonic Colors, so it doesn't really have an identity of its own. It's not nearly as interesting as an original Sonic game. But the most interesting thing about this game actually has to do with its story, so we're gonna have to talk about that in another video. Until then, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.